Right. Okay. So thank you everyone who's come today through the InterMine Google Summer of Code webinar. So today we are going to be talking a little bit about applying for Google Summer of Code, what it's like to work with InterMine, what we're looking for with students, and also going to get some students to share a bit of info, what they found it was like, and then we're going to also talk about the projects. So feel free to ask questions. Probably the easiest way is by just typing them directly in the text, in the agenda text. Maybe highlight it in a different color just so they're really easy to spot, and add your name as well. So for example, if I had a question, I might make a new bullet point and then say yo, question name, and then highlight that in green just so that it's really easy to spot. So first of all, this call is recorded. So please don't have your webcam on unless you want to be recorded. And we have a code of conduct. So this is something we've launched very recently. But basically, the main idea is that we have a really nice community, and we really want it to stay that way. We don't want to end up with any accidental fights or anyone treating each other badly. Now, that's not been a problem that we've had in the slightest in the past, but it's also something we don't want to happen in the future. So it would be nice, feel free to take a couple of minutes and just look through the Code of Conduct draft link that we have. So this should govern all of your interactions in general with InterMine. But as a general rule, treat each other well. Don't say anything mean. Criticism when it's constructive is okay, but just saying this sucks or I don't like it is less useful. Treat each other nicely is the moral of the story there. And if at any reason you feel like this code of conduct has been violated, so if you feel that people aren't abiding by it, then you can speak to me. So my email address is there on the agenda. If it's something I've done, I really hope it wasn't, but if it was, then you can also speak to Julie or anyone else in the InterMine team if necessary. So you can also use Discord if you want to speak to us, but I'd recommend do that in a private chat and not necessarily out in the open. Oh, hey, Indra. So I'm just seeing more names popping in. Okay, so moving on. What is InterMine? So a quick intro. It was founded in 2002, originally specifically for scientific data for flies. So one of the problems that we have with a lot of scientific data is things like, let's say, a gene that someone does experiments on might have more than one name. And that means when you have lots of different data sources, if the same gene is referred to by two different names, it immediately becomes quite tricky to integrate that data because it's hard to know when one thing or when the two different rows and the two different documents are actually the same thing. So what we do is we make it really easy to join up lots of different types of scientific biological data. And then we make it easy for people to look at that data and answer questions, basically. So that could be, if you go, for example, to flymine.org, then you will see our web interface where people can, for example, type in the name of an interesting gene and get information about it. Or if you're a programmer, then you might use our APIs to glean that same information. And around the world now, it's not just flies. So we have about 30 InterMines, give or take, that are run by various different open source scientific organizations. So all around, we have ones for mouse and we have ones for rats. And so these are a lot of popular scientific animals, yeast, for example. And so this is all different sorts of biological data about, and so they're run in separate InterMines by different organizations, but it's all the same software. So one question that we had typed into the document was asking if we could talk about some of the interesting things that are being done in the labs. So I've tried to highlight a few of the different types of InterMines that we have. So we have one in Japan, for example, that specifically is designed to help people discover new drugs. We have another large number of InterMines that are related to food or to farming. So that's things like wheat and corn and lots of different types of beans, chickpeas, soybeans, many more that I can't think of. And we also have ones for cows and probably others I can't think of at the minute. And then I mentioned earlier a lot of the scientific popular animals like a zebrafish or a rat. So if you have any questions at this point, feel free to add in a couple of bullet points and ask them. That's fine, or you can always ask follow-up later on in the chat as well. So I'm going to move on next to the Google Summer of Code application process overview. So right now, we are at the point where we are a confirmed Google Summer of Code mentor organization, but the application period isn't officially open yet. So that means you can talk with us, you can think about the project, you can even start writing your proposal if you want, but it's actually too early to officially submit it through the Google system. Now, that doesn't mean that if you don't have ideas that you can't write them up and share them with us. So if you already have them, then absolutely, definitely start on your proposal, because the proposal is one of the important parts of Google Summer of Code, probably the most important part towards getting in. So there's a couple of documents that I've linked to at the top of the application process overview section. So the student manual, read that. There's quite a few pages, but reading that and understanding it will help you get into Google Summer of Code. It'll help you present your work correctly, and it will help guide your interactions and your work plan. So it's definitely worthwhile. And then we also have some InterMine specific Google Summer of Code linked on the next line. So these are just bits of guidance, both for students who are applying and then later on for accepted students. And also has some information, for example, how we grade our proposals. So understanding a little bit about how we grade the proposals also gives you an idea of what you probably want to be putting into the proposal when you write it. Applications will officially open on March the 25th and close on April 9th. So we still have 2 weeks roughly before they open, but like I said, feel free to start already thinking about it and interact with us. So one thing to particularly note is that most of us, well, Julie and I, we're quite happy to use the Discord chat to interact with other students, but not all mentors are in chat. So if you aren't getting any response for any reason, then they do have their email address available in the project specifications. If you need to come and speak to me or to Julie and ask any other questions, and we need to redirect you to another mentor, we can do that as well. And then one of the other things about applying is that we want to stress that pull requests are not mandatory. So they're welcome. If you want to have a pull request, that is okay. But it's more important to us that you have a good proposal and that you show a good understanding of your application than it is to do 100 pull requests. So we're not trying to get lots and lots of work for free. So one reason to think about pull requests, in my opinion at least, is that whilst you're looking at the code, you get a better understanding of what the proposals might need to be like. So if it's something that gives you an understanding of the code or what the architecture is like, then that is something that's really useful. But just submitting 50 or 100 pull requests, that's absolutely not something we're looking for. We're looking for good quality proposals most of all. And remember, if you've got exams, you've got homework, you want to sleep and eat, we don't want you to be stopping doing any of those things. Moving on to submitting applications. So at the moment, if you have an application draft, then I would either message your mentor with the application draft, like a link to the application, or I would email them. I probably wouldn't recommend sharing them openly in chat, just because each person should be working on the applications individually, and it doesn't want to look like there's any evidence of plagiarism. Yeah, or just rolling back a little bit, we were talking about pull requests. Julie's pointed out that a good way to provide evidence of your coding ability. So, for example, if you don't have any uni assignments you can share or any other projects, then doing a pull request or two does show us what you've been doing. But again, that's only if you don't have anything else that you feel like you can share. And uni assignments are a perfectly reasonable thing that we're quite happy to look over as well. And if you do make pull requests, remember that we are getting pull requests from a lot of people at the minute. So if it takes us a little while to actually review those, it's just because we have a lot of other pull requests at the same time. We probably are aware of it and we haven't forgotten you. All right, hopping back to submitting applications. Sorry for jumping about. So if you're thinking about your proposal, then we recommend you use our proposal template. So there is a link there in the document. I've just highlighted it. You just make a copy of that document and save it on your own drive. And we also have a proposal from Nupur. She was one of our Google Summer of Code students last year. So she actually had a really good proposal. So if you want any guidance or any tips for what a real accepted proposal looks like, then you can look through hers. And you can submit up to 3 applications. So I would recommend focus on 1 application first of all, because 1 really good application is going to be a lot better than 2. But if you have enough time that you feel like there's room for more, then you can consider applying for a different project with InterMine. Or it could even be another application with a different organization, sort of hedging your bets that way. But you can't submit more than 3. And again, if you're not sure between pull requests or between application, always work on the application. And we have some tips for some of the most important things that we'd like to see in an application. And I would say the single most important thing is whether or not you understand the problem that we are trying to solve. So that means don't copy and paste the project description, but instead try and reword it in your own words to show that you have thought about it and then yet you have possible solutions that you think will be achievable. Some of the things we really like to see in applications is nice detailed timelines that show roughly what you're going to do every week or every 2 weeks, and that aren't over ambitious. So Google Summer of Code, you're supposed to work 30 hours a week roughly. So we don't want you to say that you're going to do hundreds of things in the first week. We don't want you to say that you're going to do almost nothing in the first week. We want you to seriously think, what can I do in a week or in 2 weeks, and write that down. So it needs to be very realistic. One popular question that we get is, can I use X library or should I use Y library? So in some cases, we have specific requirements. For example, for the Spring project, you've got to use Spring. But for many other projects, if we haven't specified something, that means that you are allowed to propose what you think might be reasonable. We would like to see that you've thought about it. So, for example, you might say, I want to use React because it gives X, Y, and Z advantages. Or you might say, I was thinking about React versus Vue, and I decided on Vue because of some other reason. The main thing is that you need to justify your choices and say, this is why I've chosen it and why I think it would be a very good job for this thing. And I can't stress enough, whether making a pull request or working on the application, it's always the application, unless you're really sure that it's in a fantastic place. Once those applications are submitted, so we have the grading criteria. There's a link, I've just highlighted it, that's on the top of page 4. So the grading that we do is not shared externally. So you won't necessarily say, oh, you got a 10 or you got a 7. But it is just something to allow us, when we have 30, 40, 50 applications, it's a way of allowing us to sort our applications and see who's performing and in what ways. So definitely have a think about how you might be representing yourself against those criteria when you're working on your application. The other thing to bear in mind is that we don't know at the moment how many student slots we will get. So I think we have about 12 projects at the minute. That doesn't mean that we will get 12 student slots available. So we might end up with 5 or 6 or 7. Last year we had 6, and the year before we had 5. So it's reasonable to assert that we might get a similar number of students this year. So if you do have time to apply for multiple organizations, then that's definitely something that's worth trying. Another thing is that some projects have really high interest and some projects have lower interest. And if a single project has 12 students that are trying to get a place, and only one of them is going to get it, you could consider maybe applying for one of the quieter projects, because then there's going to be a little bit less competition. We will try and share that. So I have one question from Roger, and feel free to add any more questions if you wish. This is on page 4, roughly in the middle. So Roger says, can we already submit our proposal drafts to the mentors? Yes. So if you submit it in Discord chat, then please do it on a private channel. Mentor's email is fine as well. If you don't have the email and you are ready to submit something at the minute, then please ask the mentor politely just to share their email addresses in chat. Although I think both Julie and my email addresses are at the top of the document here, so you should be able to find us. If there are any other questions, or if there are any questions that I've missed, I'm not able to monitor the chat. Just double checking quickly. Oh, so the number of projects and seats are not equal. So how can one figure out the seriousness of the project or the changes that project is going to be selected? So I think we can give you a rough idea, maybe after this call, of how busy each of the projects are. Chances, thanks, that helps. So the chances that project is going to be selected, it depends on a lot of things. So at some point, once the application period is closed, we will go through that grading process, and we will look at what good students we have versus what projects we have. And that's probably not the answer you want to hear, but right now we don't know what's going to be selected. It really depends on what students we have and also the number of slots. So a project that is on the edge, if we have 5 slots, we might get in, but if we only had two student slots, then that project might not get in. I wish I had a more definitive answer than that, but unfortunately that's all I have at the minute, is that we really don't know. Because it depends on Google, unfortunately, because Google tells us how many slots we can have, and that's not up to us. Right, okay, looking, no more questions so far. If I've missed any questions further up the document, please do let me know, or type in chat or ping me. And you can always ask further questions afterwards if you wish. So I'll just minimize that again. Right. So what is Google Summer of Code like as a student? Adriana, are you ready?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? I hope yes. Okay, thank you. So, hello everyone. I'm Adriana. I was one of the Google Summer of Code students last year, and my project was the InterMine data browser, where some of you have already collaborated, and I need to thank you for that. So, the idea of this project is based on the fact that, well, as you probably already know, for users to query InterMine to effectively answer their questions, they need to know enough from the data model in order to write correct queries. So the idea here was to develop an interface that was able to aggregate data from different mines and make it easier for users to see what data is in there and get a glance of what's inside each mine by means of visualizations, filters, and others. So what's important here is what did I get out of GSoC. So in my opinion, GSoC was a very unique experience, basically because I got a hands-on experience on working with a very big software code base. And this is something that you don't usually get when you work on university projects or high school projects. So this is one of the important things you get out of GSoC. And the other thing is that you learn how to collaborate and work jointly with different people, which are your mentors and maybe some other students if you get to collaborate with them in your project or you help them in their projects, if there's a chance to do that. So the other thing is that you will be building something that is actually useful for a community. So you have end users. You are not just building something because you love to code. I mean, of course you can love to code, but it is better if you are doing that for some reason. Well, I like so much experience that I didn't hesitate to apply for a job in the mentor organization when I knew that there was a vacancy. And well, you see me here, so that means I got the I got the job. So yeah, if you have any question about GSoC or any other thing, just ask me by email or chat, and feel free to do so. I'm very friendly, I think.
Awesome, thank you, Adrienne. So I also have a video from Nupur. She was one of Julie's students last year, so if you bear with me, I'm going to figure out how to play it and share it for you all. Okay, so let's try screen sharing. Show Google Chrome. Okay, and if I press play.
Hi everyone, I'm Nupur Gurbat. I worked with InterMine GSoC 2018 and my project was Python client. So about the whole experience of GSoC, it was the most productive and one of the best months of my college life at least. And there's something like, there are a few tips I would like to give you as a participant. And the first one is that start contributing now and contribute as much as you can. I mean, it will help your profile so much and you'll learn new things and it will open you to the world of open source, and that will be a great learning experience. And try to find beginner issues to begin with. Usually when you're new to InterMine, you message on the Discord channel, everybody helps you out that what you need to do as a beginner in your respective field of interest. So do that. Try to find, try to find bugs in the documentation as well. It helps a lot as a contribution, and you learn how to contribute. The second thing I would like to say is that I think the deadline for proposals is what, March end. At least at our time it was 27th of March. So I would say that making the proposal is a very tedious task, and if you want to make a very good proposal which is thorough and which is precise to all the problems that it deals with, then you should start it by mid-March. And feel free to ping any of us for our proposals. We'll help you out. We'll show you our proposals. And I guess after you are done with the first copy of your proposal, the first draft, after that you can ping the mentors and you can ask them to review. Even the people who are not your mentors can review it if you're open, like if you're okay with sharing proposal with them, because I think it should be confidential. The third thing that I would like to say is that don't stop contributing. Contribute even after you're done with your proposal. And the process is like the more you contribute, the more you learn about InterMine, and the more you start linking yourself, and the more you start feeling as a part of the organization, and that really helps. So that was it. For me, it was a very, very good experience. Everybody was so supportive. The whole team was overwhelming, and I mean, it was wonderful. And feel free to ping me on Facebook or even on Discord for any queries that you have. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, right. Thank you, Nupur. I don't think she actually was able to make it. I know she had class, so she wasn't able to make it today, which is a shame.
Do you want to talk about her placement this summer?
I will, yeah. So one thing that she didn't mention is that Nupur is actually working with us as a summer student this year. So she's not a GSoC student, but she has managed to achieve a work placement. So she will actually be sitting in Cambridge, couple of seats down from me, so that's pretty exciting.
So she's doing a project with, gosh, I don't really understand it that much, but
yeah, she's doing a project that's so smart that half of the InterMine team actually has no idea what she's doing, but we know it must be fantastic. So she's majoring in mathematics, so way smart. Anyway, okay. Next section that we have is the projects section. So, Julie, are you ready?
yes.
Right, I'm going to present and share my screen, and I will let you have control. So, jump to the window, go to meeting viewer. Oh, it's down there. Right. Now, Google Chrome. Right, and I click on the slides, and I open the slides. And can you, no you can't because I can't. Can you see the slides? Okay. Perry.
Okay, so
Right, it looks like when we move the speaker, we accidentally hit the mute button. So
Okay.
I'm really sorry. Julie, can you start over?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
So this is Julie. So I'm one of the mentors for some of the projects, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of the projects that I'm mentoring. And if you have any questions, please interrupt or just write your question down on the agenda. Okay, so the first one is dataset versioning. So what InterMine is it's a data warehouse. So we load these public data sets and other data sets into InterMine database, and then you view it in the InterMine web app. So we have data parsers from popular data sets. These parsers load the data into the database. We also have a little library that downloads, it's a little Perl library, and it downloads these data sets. So part of our workflow is that we run these scripts, it downloads the data, and then we have other scripts that load the data into the InterMine. So one of the things that this data download script does is it scrapes the version of the data set, but there's no standard way to set the version. So it's not always successful. So because I think it varies for each data set. So we can set the version manually, but because there's 30 or so data sets depending on mine, but in some mines there's up to 60 data sets. We really want to do this automatically. And so there's that part, so there's the Perl part, and then there is, once we have that version available, I'm thinking like we do it now in a text file next to the data file. So then when the second part, so we download the data, when the data is actually loaded by Java libraries into the database, we also want to load that version. So why is this important? Why do we care? Well, it's absolutely essential for reproducibility. So if a scientist runs some analysis, they need to know mostly where the data came from, but they also need to know what version it was because science changes. So they need to say, I use version 2 of this database. So it's essential. And the problem is that you can do it manually now, but because it's hard and boring, nobody does it. So if you actually look into FindMine, which is the one that I do, you look at data set, a lot of them don't have versions because it's hard to do. So it's really essential and it's really high visibility. I think that I have it classified as easy, meaning that the Perl library is very well documented and well tested, and so it's very very nice to use, and it already does the version. You just have to add additional ways. The Java API is also well defined, so it's well defined where these data sets are set. So that's why I'm saying it's easy, but it's in quotation marks because, of course it's going to be challenging. And it's challenging because there's no standard way to get a data version. So in the requirements, I go through in detail about which data sets and give kind of examples of, sometimes they're in HTML, sometimes they're via FTP, sometimes we parse the file name to get the version. So it's a challenge. So also nobody's asked me about this. Maybe somebody has, I've forgotten, but there's not a lot of interest in this project. So if you were looking for something that was pretty straightforward, this might be the project for you. So my tips for successful application is to read the requirements very carefully. And I think that everybody has skimmed them, but you need to actually read every line and address most of the concerns. Again, this all comes from my brain, and it's my idea of how things should be. So if something doesn't make sense, please ask. I have already forgotten some things, so please don't be afraid to ask something that you might think is a stupid question. It's not. So in your proposal, you need to show, I think you mentioned this already, that you understand the problem and you have a plan for the solution. So I want to see the evidence that you've tried the data download, you know what a version is, and maybe you have an approach to handle this kind of diversity. And I think pseudocode really would help your proposal here. And then do your proposal early enough so I can get feedback. I don't work Fridays and none of us work weekends. We're very work-life balance aware, so don't wait until last minute. But I'm very happy to read your proposal. Okay, so the next one is another one really popular tool that we're really excited about is the data modeler tool. So each InterMine shares a core data model. So when I say data model, when I'm talking about the schema of the database, so, in the relationships. So, an InterMine will have genes and have proteins, or genes and have publications, and a relationship between those two. I hope that's clear. So we have a core model. So every InterMine has genes, for example, and publications. But they can extend this model to be whatever they want to be. So we actually start with the sequence ontology, and if you click on that link, it goes to a model browser, which is a nice browser that you might get inspired by. And so what we need is a nice tool to explore the data model of whatever mine they select. So they want to be able to view the model in a graphical way. They also want, we want a search function to see how a specific data type is handled by the mine. So they want to be able to say, mouse mine, what does the model schema look like in mouse mine? And then we also want to be able to say, synteny, like let's search for synteny. Does anybody have synteny in their mind? And then display how it was handled. So this tool can be in any language in the InterMine stack, so Perl, Python, Java, or JavaScript, we don't care. And the next one is, so I think this is going to be challenging because there are a lot of mines. So as you said, there's over 30. So I think that how to organize that information, like if a lot of people have synteny, like how are you going to page through it? How are you going to, it's a graph, so are you going to be able to navigate through the graph, or is it going to be a text presentation? I think, because you're representing a network, so how do you do that graph, textually, so people can, view it correctly? I think it's a challenge. I think the UI is going to be a challenge. So it's going to be a useful tool because this is why we came up with this project, is because people ask this question all the time. And to do that, they go to mine to look to see what other people did. So there is a need for this, but I think like any tool, well, not any tool, they won't use it if it isn't user-friendly. So that is going to be a big component of the project. And I put easy here, although I just got done telling you it's hard. I put easy because it's a solved problem. I mean, there's lots of libraries and examples to show you how to render graphs I just think, so I think the technical part will be okay. It's making it consumable by the end user is the challenge. Again, read the requirements very carefully. Please ask. I think mock-ups are essential because you need to really and they can be slapdash or, just to get the idea across of what your ideas for how to solve this problem. You're pointing at the chat.
No,
do you want to go
there? Checking. Can I just add one thing about mock-ups?
Please.
Quickly, is that mock-ups, it can mean anything from pencil and paper sketches that you've taken a photograph of on your phone. And the advantage to those types of mock-ups is it takes you minutes to create, and you don't feel bad if you toss them in the bin. If you spend hours doing it in Photoshop, if it's not right, you're going to feel sad. So at least for the early versions, always mock pencil and paper. Save yourself some time. You won't cry. That's all I had to add there.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm not interested in how beautiful the mock-ups are, but they need to convey the information about how you would solve this problem of having a lot of information to give. So yeah, it was right. Okay, did you have questions? Okay. The schema validator. This is one that Goss, our boss, mentioned. I think this is his idea to give you an idea of the importance. So I just mentioned our data parsers. So we have a bunch of libraries for popular biological data file formats. Unfortunately, when it's not foolproof, so there's tools to generate these file formats, but people can edit them. There can be corruption. We find bad files all the time. So what we want is a library that's going to take the rules for these biological data file formats and enforce them. So that you're going to input the file and output the file, output if the file was valid, and if not, then say what happens. It's got to be a Java library because we need it in our Java, we want to use it as a dependency for another Java project. So again, the challenges are the files can look like anything, and it needs to be very well designed. So I think this project is going to be under a lot of scrutiny for code review because we want it very modular so we can add other file types. And I put it as easy because these rules are very defined. So you're supposed to have 8 columns. The first column is supposed to be a string. The second column is supposed to be a integer. So there are clearly defined rules, and there are already validators out there. Like I think BioJava is what we use to load fast data. So there are clearly different rules. So I think it is, that's why it's easy.
Okay.
And then, so again, read the doc very carefully. I want you in your proposal to say which file types you're going to try to validate and how. Unit tests are absolutely essential, so those will be required in documentation. So I want to see those in your timeline and your milestones because every validator will want to make sure that we are validating everything. And so I think pseudocode is also essential for this. Okay, so this is Daniela's project. This is high priority and high visibility. So we're going to migrate our RESTful web services to Spring. So right now we use Struts, but we use Struts version 1, and it's quite old. It's end of life, and we've used Spring and really enjoy Spring a lot. So our InterMine web services are currently defined in Web XML. And we have an interactive web service documentation. If you click on the IO docs link, that is all the web services for FlyMine, but the web services are available for every mine. So you can play around with that and see what we can actually do with that, and also you can see that we have a lot of web services. We also want to document our web services in Swagger. Also, as a side note, one of the things that brought Swagger to our attention is that other of our competitors are a part of the Smart API project, meaning that their web services are documented in part of this project, so we want to be there as well. Okay, and so that is high priority, high visibility. So this is a medium project. I think it's quite challenging in that it's got a lot of web services. I think that splitting them apart and migrating the web services, I think every migration project is a challenge, and there are going to be dependencies we didn't think about. So it's medium difficulty. I don't think it's too bad if you know Spring. It's very clearly defined success, which the other projects might not have, in that we have 70 web services in Struts, we need 70 in Spring. Daniela is going to actually be doing the splitting of the things, and she's going to be doing part of this. So it's going to be working in parallel, which I think is a good thing because you'll have lots of mentorship. We'll have lots of involvement. And the good thing is the code is well tested. So there's unit tests for everything. So we'll know immediately if something is gone wrong. And it's very mature code. It doesn't, it's well tested and well told. Okay. So the key here is we want to see evidence that you've understood the problem and that you have some experience with Spring and web services. Migration projects are really tricky, especially when we're working in parallel. Like, how are you going to mitigate that? How are you going to approach the problem as far as project management? What do you plan to do first? Can you write tests to help with this? So there's lots of moving parts. So we want to see a good plan there. And we want to see tests and documentation as part of your timeline and milestones. So we want time set apart for those. Okay, InterMine R. So InterMine R is an R package, and what it does is it allows you to, on the command line, query any and all InterMine instances. So this was a Google project in 2017, I think. So one of the things that we want to extend it as part of this project. So one of the things we want to do is code generation. So if you go to an InterMine and run a query, there's a link that you click, and it generates Python, Java, JavaScript, and Ruby and Perl code. So it generates the query in a script, and if you download that script and execute it, it will run that query on the command line. Well, we want we want to add R there. So you click a button and you generate the same search as R code. So this is very high visibility and high impact. I think that our package is popular, but I think that these are ways to even make it more popular. And this is a bigger goal, is engaging with the R community, so it's very high visibility. We also want to be interoperable with other R packages. So I think we have G ranges, so that means that we put our InterMine data into our data objects, and then these objects are then passed to third-party libraries. So I think that we did G ranges, but I think there's lots of other kind of biological data types that we can in R that we can generate so that we can interoperate with a lot of third-party packages. And then I think there's just quality of life things that can make the API a little bit easier to use. So now the Costas was the other student, and he was very, very good. So I don't want to say that you're going to get a paper, but he got a paper. And if this is for all students, if you are very good and you write a good project, you can get a paper. It's a popular library. It's high visibility. I think the challenges is that you do have to get a little bit familiar with the InterMine data and how it can be used in R. And I think we need use cases. So how actually, what could be something that somebody would use this library for. So I would have it as medium difficulty. It's not so bad, I think. If you know R and the ecosystem, I think you'll have an advantage, but you do have to know R, I think, a little bit. And Rachel is the primary mentor in this.
Yeah, can I just add something there quickly? Just a bit of context. If anyone isn't familiar with academia in particular, that writing papers about your project can be a really good thing for your CV when you're thinking about masters and PhDs or working in academia. That's all I want to add.
Okay, I thought you were going to add is that we had a workshop a couple weeks ago. It was about 30 people, and asked them how many of you or use R and how many use Python, and it was
I can't remember the ratio, but something like 70% used R, and then a few used Python, and then someone said other.
Julia, something weird. So R is very popular with the people who use InterMine. So this is a nice project. Okay, and then so we want to show evidence that you've used R and you know about its libraries. Some examples of libraries we could interop with. And I think somebody asked about a Shiny app, so support your decision and really kind of say why that would be useful, support your suggestion. And so link validation, InterMine's primary mission is to publish and make scientific data available for everyone. And part of that is to be interoperable, so to provide link outs, to be able to provide link outs to the original data source and then to other websites, third-party websites that have related data. Broken links are high visibility. It makes us look really bad. And this had happened 2 times, I think, in the last year, where somebody said the first thing that they clicked on broke, and they told us that it was bad. But there are so many link outs that we can't test them manually. This tool can be in anything in the InterMine stack, but the UI tool to display links has to be in JavaScript. So it's high impact, and some websites, I think the challenge is that there are libraries that do this already. So there are libraries that will check your website for broken links, and that is fine. But some websites, and I give examples on the requirements, they don't return 404s. The page exists, it's just not the one we want. And so that is going to be a hard thing to figure out how to do. Also, another challenge is that one mine, for example, has 2 billion records. So we can't check every single link out. Instead, we just wanted to check a representative sample. So that will be a challenge to get that. And so that's all I have to say. So we want to see evidence. You've addressed all the concerns and the requirements. So we have the properties issue, and you've thought about the solution. Okay, authorization and authentication. So we have running a tool that imports data files and generates a config that you need to build an InterMine in the cloud. We need to have some authentication scheme for mines in the cloud. This can be in any language in the InterMine stack. You can use any cloud technologies or authentication scheme, but you need to support your decision. And it's okay if you use part of the time for research if you don't know exactly what you want to do, but just do have a good plan for how you're going to spend that time. So this is high visibility and high impact. I say it might lead to a paper. I can't imagine that it would, because this is really interesting stuff. It's challenges, so there's lots of moving parts. I haven't written the other components yet, but we do have a well-defined API. I think that this is classified as hard. I think it's probably our hardest project. Authentication is very hard, and working in the cloud is very hard. So you need to show evidence for which technologies you choose. You need to say what you chose and why you chose it, and give good support. And you absolutely need to have some mock-ups and some sequence diagrams about how everything is going to work together. Okay. Finally, my last project is the single sign-in for InterMine. So this is Daniela's project. So right now you have to log into FlyMine and look at your lists and searches, and then you log into YeastMine and you use your list, look at your lists and searches. We had the idea of a single login for InterMine. The idea is this is especially noticeable on BlueJeans or when you use our mobile app. So we have an Android app, in that you have to log into each. You can't just search across all mines. So we want to be an OAuth 2 provider in which we are able to authenticate people. We're just want a prototype. We're not expecting production code because I think this is going to be a long, big project. Instead, we're looking for a proof of concept that we can extend. And we have this is going to be a difficult project as well because authentication is hard to do. It's hard to do right. Okay, so we need to see some evidence of experience or knowledge of OAuth 2. Diagrams would be helpful here. We need a migration plan. So right now we have an authentication system, so how are we going to move to another one? Also, we need a risk analysis because if we have a single point of failure for logins for all InterMines everywhere, that is a big risk, and so we need a really good risk analysis here about what we can do to mitigate the dangers.
That's all the slides.
That's
well
all
done,
the
Julie. Okay, I'm de-presenting. Right, so I'm going to just check the agenda for questions. So if you have any questions and we've skipped them, I'm going to run through and have a look. Or feel free to type them now as well, and or remind us in chat. And I think Adrian has been answering questions.
Yeah, I answered one question about the versioning project.
Thank you so much. Right, scrolling through, I think the first question we have some questions from the Migrating RESTful Web Services. Julie, have you already answered those?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm happy if there's any more.
So I'll just try and sum them up quickly. So Ankit asks, will migration only concern backend? And the answer is yes. And do I have to participate in the separation of the backend and the front end for the Spring project? And the answer is no. That is something that Daniela will be doing. So when Julie was mentioning working in parallel with Daniela, so she'll probably be doing the backend and front end separation, whilst you are working on the migrating from Struts to Spring. And as Julie mentioned earlier, Struts is very old, and we want to make sure that we have something that's secure and relatively modern and that's documented better. And Ankit asks about tests, and the answer is you don't have to write integration tests. We're only looking for unit tests at this point. And I don't think I see any other questions on Julie's projects. So I'll just double check in the chat again. Nope, nothing else. Okay, remember you can always ask us later if you need to. Right, so I will start talking about my project. So I do not have slides. And so the first project that I want to talk about is upgrading IAM tables and IAM.js. So right now we have a couple of libraries that we use in JavaScript to access InterMine data. So the communications library is known as IAM.js, and we use that to create queries and fetch the data and manipulate the data on the client side, or theoretically can do this in Node as well if you wish. And IAM tables, we uses IAM.js for the communication, but what it does is it provides a user interface for our query results. So if someone says, give me all of the genes that start with B, for example, then you would have a table of all of the genes showing in IAM tables. Now, what we want for this project is we want someone to help us upgrade it a little bit. So the last time that any of these libraries, IAM.js or IAM tables, had any real updates was probably 2014. And they're both written in Java, in CoffeeScript, which then compiles to JavaScript. And things have changed a little bit. So the reason people might have used CoffeeScript in the past was because they wanted other features that weren't available in JavaScript. But with ECMAScript 2015 and onwards, these features actually are available. So it's not necessarily quite as important to have them in CoffeeScript as it used to be. And we also have some very out-of-date dependencies that we would like to upgrade to ensure that IAM tables and IAM.js stay secure and are easy to build. Right now, I think you have to use Node 0.10 to build them or something like that, so it's quite an old version. So we would like to upgrade them. Another thing that we're looking for is for the tests that we have to create some mock unit tests. So right now we have integration tests, so you have to set up an InterMine in order to run the tests on IAM.js. And we would like for you to be able to run tests on IMJS and make sure that it's still working the way you'd expect without having to set up a whole InterMine on your machine. So I'm just reading through this question here. Could you please elaborate on the second point and the required features? I think I just answered that question. If I haven't, or if you have any follow-up questions, please do ask further or poke me in Discord afterwards and I'll see if I can elaborate further. If there are any other questions, please write them in. I will move on to the JavaScript data visualizations project. Actually, no, sorry. I'm going to rewind. I have a couple of other things I wanted to say about IMTables and IMJS. Just that whilst it is in CoffeeScript at the minute, one option which you can consider is definitely not mandatory, but it is something that you might be able to build in your project plan, would be to use the decaffeinate library to convert it into JavaScript rather than CoffeeScript. But that's only a maybe. It depends what else and how else you feel that you're building your project plan. But it is one option. But you will need to learn at least enough CoffeeScript to be able to update, run, and modify the projects no matter what. And now I really am moving on to the JavaScript data visualizations project. So this is, I think, quite a fun project, personally. Basically, the idea is that you get to select 2, 3, 4, 5 different interesting visualizations that exist in JavaScript, and either you need to evaluate the libraries that already exist to create these visualizations, or in some scenarios it might be more appropriate to create the visualization yourself from scratch. This could be, for example, using something like D3 or any other interesting JavaScript visualization library. So I'm just laughing because Julie's added the note that this is a high priority and high visibility project, but I guess with the data visualization, it definitely has to be a visual project. So some of the interesting challenges around this project is that whilst you will be writing purely in JavaScript, the framework that it is built into is a framework that runs in Clojure. So our new user interface that we hopefully will be launching in a few months or something like that is built primarily in ClojureScript. This compiles to JavaScript, but it's a functional language. It's a version of Lisp. So you do not have to learn Clojure, but you do have to make sure that you comply with some of our rules, what we call the tool API, which is a set of specifications that allows any JavaScript applications to interact with BlueJeans so that it can be presented in our new user interface. So I think that's reasonably well documented, but if at any point any parts of the tool API aren't clear, then feel free to ask me questions about that. It's also possible I've overlooked something. But I think this is fun because we have quite a few different options for visualizations, and you can basically pick a few that you think are interesting and vie for that. There's even theoretically potential that if 2 students manage to choose non-overlapping visualizations and we had enough slots, that might be asking for too much, but it is theoretically possible that we could have 2 people working on this because they'll be working on different visualizations. Moving on to the Similarity Finder tool. So I know that Himanshu has mentioned that there aren't a lot of details about this one. That's for a very good reason, mostly because we still haven't worked out the details ourselves. So what we do know for sure is we're looking at a JavaScript-based library. It probably will be something that will be embedded in BlueJeans, much like the JavaScript data visualizations project as well. Probably it will be based on Cytoscape and will allow us to visualize the queries in the InterMine model in some way. We will get better documentation up for that, and we are aware that it's lacking at the minute. So native JavaScript sounds better to me than a framework or library, just because it's literally going to be embedded in another component, and we don't want to have libraries embedded within libraries within reason, but also if you feel like you can justify a library, we'll absolutely consider that. The main thing is that we don't want to slow our browser down so badly that nothing's running. But we will provide more updates for that tool. And moving on a bit further, the unit test suite for the Clojure application. So this is a chance if you do like Clojure or you're interested in Lisp or functional programming, BlueJeans, our user interface, doesn't have much in the way of unit testing. So we have Travis CI running, and it checks that the project builds successfully, and it checks that the project is formatted nicely, but we don't have a lot in the way of unit testing individual parts of the project. This would involve also testing certain parts of the UI, so it might involve something like headless testing. But I'd be happy to discuss that further with anyone if they had any questions about that. But you would need to know Clojure to address this one. Moving on further, implementing a graph or tuple-based backing database for InterMine. Oh, this is Sam's one.
Yes.
Right, okay. Right, so in 2017, I'll rewind further. InterMine is based on Postgres. So we have a relational database at the back for InterMine, and we are curious about graph databases. So they didn't really exist when we started InterMine, like 2002 is a while back, but since then there have come a few interesting ones onto the scene. So in 2017, one of our students did some work investigating on Neo4j, and we aren't taking that further forward at the minute, but what we would like to do is consider whether Mongo could be a backing store for InterMine at all. So to get started with this one, I would recommend looking at the Neo4j blog posts that we have, maybe looking at the project and getting an understanding of how you load data into InterMine, because what we need to do is we need to think how we load this data into MongoDB instead. And the mentor for this project is Sam Hoken. He is actually not based in Cambridge with the rest of us. He is based with several InterMines based in America with beans, soybeans, legumes, peanuts, chickpeas, lots and lots of yummy, yummy things. And he's really nice as well. Okay, moving on. The link, no, these are all Julie's ones. I think that means I'm done. Let me just... Okay, I'm just going to double check for any other questions here. I don't think there's any new questions. No. Okay, I think...
There's a question for Julie on the versioning project. If you go up. Versioning project.
Oh, thank you. Okay, there's a line in the dataset, if a data provider changes their format, need to fail loudly. So this is the idea about error handling, I suppose, is that if we download the data, it's in data versioning, and we expect the version to look a certain way, and also sudden the version is not that looks like what we expect, then the data download should fail. So it should be a fatal error, so that we can look and see how where the version has gone to, because that it should always be what we expect, if that makes sense.
If I could provide a similar example where something doesn't fail loudly.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a scenario where the InterMine registry, it had an old link, and it checks once every 24 hours for links to make sure that the InterMine is still up and still running, so that we're not telling people about dead InterMines. But in one scenario, when it had the wrong link, what was returned was an HTML page. And so rather than saying this is dead, it actually said that it put like the version number was the HTML page or something, so it still kind of worked,
Yeah.
but it worked very wrong. So our version was now an HTML code.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So we want to say alert, alert, this is broken, and have a little red light come out of the computer. I'm exaggerating, but only a tiny bit. Okay, I think there's one more question about the BlueJean tool API and Yeoman generator. So the tool API, basically we have a set of files that we have to have for BlueJeans in order for a JavaScript visualization to be able to interact with BlueJeans, our new user interface. And we don't want you to have to write 25 files the same each time for each new JavaScript tool that you create. So what the Yeoman generator does is it asks you a few quick questions, like is this supposed to be for proteins, or is this going to be for a gene page? And then it automatically sets up the required files for you. And the idea is that then you can go and you can sort of just fill in the blanks. And so it generates all of the boilerplate that you don't want to write. So I might compare an example to, let's say, when you're making a new HTML page, you always have to put HTML at the top, and then head, and then body. And if you could just do that really quickly and copy and paste all of the default stuff, it saves you a lot of time. So in the same way, the Yeoman generator, it does the default things that you always need, and then you can just concentrate on writing the bits of code that are interesting and fun and meaningful. Does that answer the question? Yes, rather than implementing from scratch. Yes. Yeah, awesome. Okay, are there any questions? Oh, there's a question about the single sign-on project. In the single sign-on project, can we use open source identity solutions to implement? Julie?
What would be the other option? Yeah, but we would want to use a proprietary solution, yes.
So I think we're saying we would like you to use those, please, rather than not only can you, but yes, please. Right. If there's anyone who still has questions that we've missed in the document, please just type in chat. Oh, wait.
Maybe just make a point that everything should be open source.
Oh, yes. That is a very important point. So when you're doing your planning, don't go for anything that's closed source. For example, an API that might disappear next week isn't something that we feel safe with. So we are open source and we need everything that we use to be open source as well. So consider licenses. Also, it's not likely that we'd want to go for something that has an expensive subscription, for example. So make sure that you're thinking about the open source ethos, I suppose, when you're working on this, and the sustainability in general.
And that's true for especially Google libraries and Amazon libraries, these large ones. They can change their licenses, which has gotten us in trouble.
Yeah, so BlueJeans, before we had BlueJeans, we had another project that was going to be the new InterMine UI, and it was based on Angular 1. And before we actually had it launched, Angular got discontinued. So we have been burnt by that a little bit in the past. Or rather, Angular 1 got discontinued and the newer versions got created, and you couldn't upgrade easily. So definitely considering carefully. Do use libraries, but consider which ones you use and justify them as well. I think that's all the questions I had. Open mic, if anyone wants to ask any questions with their voice at the minute. Okay, echoing in the awkward silence. All right, so you know where to find us if you have any further questions. If we don't answer in a couple of days, it's always okay to say, hey, did you miss this? Because sometimes the Discord chat, I come in and there's like 86 messages since last time I was there. So it's possible we miss things. It's been really nice answering all of your questions. I hope they were helpful. And feel free to email us and Discord us if you have any further questions. And apart from that, have a great day, everybody. And bye-bye. Okay, bye all.
Bye.
I'm going to end the call. And meeting for all.